Hey kiddos, today we're going to talk about car gauges and what they mean. And with me is Grammy, my wife of 35 years.
I actually asked Grampy to do this Grampy's Garage episode because recently I was driving a vehicle I wasn't really used to, and Grampy had given me a heads up before I left. Be sure to watch the temperature gauge while you're driving. And before long, I smelled that the engine of this vehicle I was driving it smelled kind of hot. And I called him and realized, I said, my gauge looks fine, but I'd been looking at the oil pressure gauge and not the temperature gauge. So I said, hey, Grampy, for one of your Grampy Garage episodes, could you cover gauges for people like me that may need a little help?
So that's what we're going to do today, and we're going to look at several different cars, starting with our oldest one to our newest one. So I hope you enjoy it and I hope you learned something. Here we go. For our first vehicle, we're going to take a look at the dash on my '69 Chevy truck. We're going to start with the oldest because it's simplest. This technology hasn't really changed over the years, but the way it plays out in an older vehicle is just so much easier to look at and understand. So by the time we get through the newest vehicle, you should be able to see the similarities. So one little free thing I'll throw in, I'm always saying that tools don't cost you money, they save you money. In some cases, they actually make you money. When I got out of contracting, I ended up looking for a truck that I could drive, and everything is super expensive these days, and I like fixing things. So I picked up this old truck. It needed some work, but right now it's currently worth twice what I paid for it, including what it took to get it on the road and everything fixed up. So I've actually doubled my money, and I'm using this truck. It's not a showpiece. I'm not trying to restore it to new condition. I'm actually driving it and using it and having a good time. And you'll see some of that in the dash because I made some modifications there that aren't factory. But anyway, let's take a look at that dash. I'll show you what those modifications are and how to read these gauges. All right, so we're starting inside the old beast here. And now you can see the whole dash right there. But we are going to not look at the gauges you look at every day. We're going to check out the gauges that we typically ignore most of the time. So we'll start with the tachometer. The tachometer tells you how fast your engine is spinning. So right now it's at about 700 RPMs, which means rotations or revolutions per minute. And it says 1 there, and 2, 3, 4, all the way up. It's actually by the thousands. So I'm going to pick it up to about 2,000 RPM. All right, and if you look down at the center of that, you're going to see the times 1,000. So that means the 2 actually times 1,000 is 2,000. So when it's at 2,000 RPMs, that engine is turning over 2,000 times every minute. Okay, so that's a good indicator of what your engine speed is, and the lower that is, the better fuel economy you're getting. The higher that is, the more fuel you're burning. But the higher that is, the more power you have, too. You have more torque. So anyway, that just kind of lets you know what the engine's doing. So let's move over to the water temperature gauge. Okay, now a lot of cars these days have what we used to call old school idiot lights, meaning that you don't know what the water temperature is, but if it gets hot, a red light pops on, and anybody can read that, and the red light pops on, you pull over. In this truck, I actually installed these gauges down below because I like to know what's going on. So you'll notice they don't look factory original. That's because I put them in. So the water temperature, if you have a water temperature gauge and you don't know when the red is, as you see in this one, it doesn't tell you green and red and when to worry. The best thing you can do is to just look at it when everything's working. Get used to it where it's supposed to be, because 99% of the time you'll warm up the vehicle, drive down the road, it's always going to be about in the same spot. That way, when something doesn't seem right, you look down at your gauge, you'll know that it's not where it normally is, and you'll know there's a problem. I should pull over and check it. A lot of cars have gauges that do have the green and the red, so you know when it's a big deal or not. All right, let's jump over to the oil gauge. kind of the same thing for that, where you just want to know what normal is by looking at it now and then. And again, a lot of cars just have the oil light, so if that comes on, you got to get off the road real quick. But at least with an oil gauge, you can know what's happening. And I'm going to speed up hit the gas a little bit, and watch that gauge. It'll probably go up a little bit. As the engine spins, the pressure increases, typically. But again, you're going to just want to know what's normal for your car if you have an oil gauge. Where is that thing riding all the time? Okay, and finally, we'll look at the voltmeter, the volt gauge. Your battery is 12 volts. You always want that to be 12 volts or above. That's meaning it's charging. This one does have the color indicators to give you a little help. But that's a lot like the tool we used in another video when we were checking our battery. It's really the same thing. So you can be paying attention to that. If your alternator dies, this is a great gauge because you'll notice things are dimming a little bit. You can look down, and if that thing's slowly dropping, then that means your alternator is dead. You've got a limited amount of time to get to somewhere to fix it or to get home. So that gauge is actually pretty handy to have. And for me, again, I like to know what's going on under the hood of my vehicle. And the way they set things up is a little bit different with every vehicle. Again, some have just warning lights and some have gauges. Very few have both. I prefer the gauges so I know what's happening. All right, let's hop out of this truck and take a look at a Jeep. All right, we are in a 2005 Jeep Wrangler. You can see these gauges are a little bit more modern, but you'll see they all do the exact same thing. So we won't look at the things you're used to looking at. I think you can read a fuel gauge, okay? So let's start with the volt gauge. As you can see, 12 volts is your battery. It's above that, so the alternator's charging. Your power system looks good. Just to the right of that is a tachometer. We talked about that in the truck. Just like the other one, times 1,000. So at 1, it's actually 1,000 RPMs. At 2, it's 2,000 RPMs, just like the truck. No difference whatsoever. Okay, let's go on to our right. And the top right, we're looking at the oil pressure gauge. Now this one doesn't have numbers on it like the one in the truck did. So you're going to need to know what's normal for you. You've got low and high pressure, low pressure, and it's riding pretty much in the middle. So again, just knowing where that should be by checking it every day. And then your bottom right is your temperature gauge. Now this one does have some red. If you get up there to the red, you need to pull over right away. Overheating can really damage an engine, but you know right about where it should be. When it's warming up, it'll work its way up to that spot, and then it'll stop right there. And so now you know what is going on with your temperature. I'm going to go ahead and shut this off, and I'm going to show you something else. Okay, now this Jeep has a super cool feature that is not in a lot of other vehicles that I have personally seen before, and that is a check gauges light. So basically, if that comes on, you're going to want to look at all your gauges. It's telling you, something's wrong. So I'm going to turn on the ignition so you can see what that light looks like. Red light on the right, check gauges. If that thing ever lights up when you're going down the road, it's real important to look at the gauges and to know what's going on. To the left, there's the check engine light. It's supposed to look like the drawing of an engine. That light is one of the few that is not usually super urgent. If that light comes on and you're driving down the road and everything seems fine, your gauges are okay, then just when it's convenient, take it to a mechanic. If that light is on and the thing isn't running right, well then you probably ought to pull over and call the tow truck or figure out what's going on. So as you can see, not really that much different than the 69 truck. It just looks a little bit nicer and a little bit cleaner. So let's hop into a 2018 Honda Fit next and see what that looks like. That'll be our newest, latest model vehicle we'll take a look at. And for our last car, we'll do Grammy's 2018 Honda Fit. It's the sport model, so it doesn't have a full line of gauges in it, but let's take a look. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go left to right, And once again, we're not hitting the stuff you use every day. We're using the stuff that you may just use from time to time. So on the far left, we have a little button that's got a car with some skid marks. Now what can happen is the car is going to automatically control some of its acceleration and deceleration features when you're skidding, and you can turn that off to give you 100% control of the car. So really, for most people, you're going to want to leave that on unless you have a lot of experience dealing with driving in poor conditions. The button just to the right of that and above it is the Econ button, economy button, and that's what turns on and off your overdrive. With the overdrive turned on, you're going to get better gas mileage and have less performance. We've talked about that a little bit before. The gauge to the far left of the 3-gauge instrument panel is primarily your tachometer gauge. And we've talked about tachometers before, so it's basically the same thing as the others. And it also shows you park, neutral, drive, and all that. In the center, you mainly have your speedometer gauge. Obviously, tells you how fast you're going. That's pretty obvious. It's also going to show you if your cruise control is on. It's still a pretty common thing that everybody uses from day to day. And if your brake is on, that's a common thing too. And if your seat belts are on, which mine is not, but I'm not going anywhere, so you know it's okay. On the tachometer gauge, you're going to have your little leaf, the same symbol as down below on the button, telling you whether it's on or off. You're also going to have your red temperature. It looks like a temperature bulb with some water underneath it. It's red to indicate heat. If that light goes on, you need to pull over immediately because it's telling you the car is overheating. A car that you continue to drive when it's overheating will blow the engine, do all kinds of damage to the engine, and be very expensive. So if that light comes on, you need to get off the road as fast, as safely as you can, shut off the engine. You'll notice just above the tachometer, there's a little gold light in the shape of an engine. Well, that's supposed to be an engine anyway. If that light comes on, that means you're going to need some service. So if the vehicle is running fine while you're driving and that light comes on and you can't hear, feel, or see or whatever, everything, you're looking at your other gauges, then you're probably fine to just take it to a mechanic as soon as you can. If the car's acting weird at all when that comes on, you ought to pull off to the side of the road as quickly as you can and shut it off and call for a tow truck. Up above the tachometer is also your tire pressure light. Now, in ideal conditions, if you have a late model, newer vehicle, that's going to be pretty accurate and you're going to want to check it out. I find a couple years down the road, it is tough to have that thing be reliable. So you definitely want to check your tire pressure if that light goes on. The light's just not always honest with you, but still, tires are super important to how you're driving, your handling, to gripping the road. I have another video on tires, so check that. But if that light goes on, check it. And you may want to, the next time you have your oil changed or somebody service your car, tell them, that light goes on all the time, what's the deal? And maybe they can reset it or check it for you. On the left side of the speedometer, there's a red light in the shape of an oil can. If you don't know what an oil can is, it'll look weird, but it's supposed to be the shape of an old school oil can. It almost looks like Aladdin's lamp. It's red, just like the temperature one is red, because that's really, really important. If that light comes on and when the car is running, then you need to get to the side of the road and pull over immediately. Without oil, if oil pressure is low, then that's going to do terrible damage to the engine. So that's one to take really seriously. That light should light up when you start the car and go off pretty quick. If it stays on, and if that light comes on and you leave the engine running, you're going to start hearing some very unfriendly noises rather quickly. So that's an important one to respect. A yellow light next to the oil light is about the braking system. If you can't stop, you're in real trouble. So take that one seriously. If the brakes are working, then you can safely go to a mechanic as soon as possible. But if you feel or notice any change in them, you need to get off the road. But if that light's on, take that seriously and head to a mechanic right away. Just to the right of that, we have a red battery light. Okay, so we are going to do a whole separate video on batteries and how to check them and do all that. But for the sake of this one, if that light comes on, that would mean that you are more than likely going to have about 15 minutes of driving before the car dies. The car runs off the alternator once it's started. The battery starts the car, but then the alternator takes over, powering the car and recharging the battery. So what normally happens, if that battery light comes on, the alternator is no longer working, and your battery is now running the car. And as we all know, if you run a battery too long, it dies, right? And it needs to be recharged. So you'll have, hard to say how long, depends on the condition of your battery, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, but the clock is running. So if that light comes on when the car is moving, it's not something to panic over, but it's something to take very seriously and realize you need to get somewhere safe or get home or get to an auto shop in a fairly quick amount of time, because your car is not going to run forever. The rest of the lights on that dash are pretty self-explanatory. They're kind of everyday items. So I hope that helps you. I hope you can understand your vehicle a little bit more. I hope it takes some of the fear away if you're overwhelmed or challenged by what's going on inside your car, because it's really pretty simple at the end of the day when you get down to it. If you just take a breath and look at all that's going on and look at all those lights, they kind of make sense when you take a look at them. So hopefully this has been helpful, and we'll put some links below for other videos. And have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time.